Hi, I'm Mike Reynolds, a senior reporter covering the media industry with S&P Global Market Intelligence, Tech, Media, and Telecom News Team. Welcome to MediaTalk, a podcast hosted by S&P Global, where the news and research staff explore issues in the ever-evolving media landscape. Today, I'm joined by four S&P Global Market Intelligence Kagan analysts. Senior analyst John Fletcher currently leads the Americas research team for broadband, multi-channel video, and mobile towers. Lynette Luna is a senior research analyst who leads coverage of U.S. consumer mobile and tower markets. Research analyst Tomás Sarmiento covers Latin America's fixed broadband networks and pay TVs, while research analyst Bruno Do Amaral monitors the Latin American mobile market, including carriers, vendors, tower companies, and technologies. We're going to be discussing recent research all of the analysts conducted around mobile and broadband business here in the Western Hemisphere. How you doing today, John?
Doing great, broadcasting to you live from my fixed wireless connection. And thanks for having me back. I think the last time we had this podcast, there was a tree in the way of my antenna for fixed wireless. So I did a speed test. The last time I did this podcast, it was getting 25 megabits per second. And I'm happy to report back that now that tree is gone, it's an astounding 45 megabits per second.
Lynette, how about you? I don't know if your speed is that great, but how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. I'm on fiber. So.
Might be a little faster.
Bruno and Tomás are making their inaugural MediaTalk appearances. How you doing, Tomás? How's it going?
Thank you very much. I'm also here from a fiber connection in Mexico City.
How about Bruno? How you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks. I'm not on fiber, but I'm on cable.
We're going to start with an overview of the Latin America and Caribbean mobile markets. John, can you just provide us an overview for Kagan's research on the subject here a little bit?
Yeah, what we decided to do is glue together the top 8 countries in the Americas and compare the broadband and mobile markets into a beauty contest. And the yardsticks we use were subscribers, ARPU, revenue, and affordability metrics, and some other things. And the 8 countries under purview are the US, Canada, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. And across those 8 countries, that's the vast majority of the people that live in the Americas. There's a population of 880 million. And if you think of mobile phones, there's about 1 billion phones. So that's a mobile penetration of about 120%. So there's more phones and devices in use than people.
Okay.
And that's not the case for fixed broadband. I'm talking about cable, fiber, satellite, and fixed wireless. That's what most people refer to as home Wi-Fi. There are 243 million residential broadband customers across the 319 million households in those 8 countries. So that's a penetration of only 76%. We think there's some room for growth there. We just finished the mobile version of this report, and the 2 takeaways that are more interesting to me is, yes, the U.S. is the largest by revenue and ARPU and subscribers, but the fastest growing market of those 8 has been, and we think will continue to be, Peru in terms of both mobile and fixed home broadband.
All right, Bruno, can you give us a little bit more 2024 for the countries that you guys looked at? What kind of year was it? It was a good one, I think, right?
Yeah, my research started from 11 countries that I used later for this America's roundup. But from these 11 countries, we've seen 2.3% annual growth, which is 15 million more net additions. And the total was 677 million subscriptions in 2024. From this total, 216 million were postpaid, which was already 3.1% growth compared to the previous year. And prepaid actually was the vast majority of this universe with more than 400 million subscriptions.
Okay.
And it's still growing.
Mexico is the largest prepaid market?
Exactly. It's almost 83% of the market is prepaid in Mexico, which is pretty much most of Latin America's total too.
Bruno, if you could talk about what's the tower situation like in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Sure. For this market, I've covered 28 countries. We've seen more than 270,000 towers. And this total considers both traditional towers and small cells and distributed antenna systems. This is already an increase by 1.9% in 2024. There were 231,000 traditional towers and about 39,000 small cells and DAS in the region.
All right. I think in Kagan's breakdown of the mobile market share, Brazil and Mexico are on top as of June this year. If you can talk a little bit about that, and then were there some notable gains from any of the other countries in your research group?
Yeah, Brazil and Mexico were by far the largest markets because combined these are 62% of the total subscriptions of these 11 markets covered. So we have Brazil with 39% of market share, followed by Mexico with 23%, Colombia 12%, Argentina with 9%, Peru with 6%. The rest are less than 5 and even less
I
than
got you.
1%.
Latin America is still very much a prepaid-led market. Is this going to change as you look at this category? Is there still growth there, or what's the market look like that way?
It's still growing, but in Brazil, we have this trend that operators are pushing for postpaid. That's something, Brazil is by far the largest postpaid market
Okay.
in Latin America. But the problem is there are more revenue opportunities in the postpaid than prepaid. I'm not sure if Mexico still try to gain market in prepaid, but predict to still have low digit growth in the next 7 years.
All right. Is 5G coming along, Bruno? Are there any barriers to that becoming a more adoptive standard?
We have 5G in Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and Mexico, about 72.4 million subscriptions in 2024. We expect that to change a lot in the next few years because every other country is already having spectrum auctions. But we also have a small problem. 5G is not growing as fast as they hoped for. Brazil had more than 4 years for 5G to hit 15 million subscriptions, and 4G only had 3.5 years.
Oh, really?
So it's growing at a slower pace already.
Let's take a look, if you will. Who are the top corporate players in your space down there in Latin America? In terms of your research, which are the top companies?
America Móvil, Intel, Liberty Latin America, Millicom, and Telefonica and Telecom Italia. But this is for 2024, right? Telefonica is exiting the market in most of countries in Latin America. So by 2025, we'll see mostly America Móvils dominating the region, with Millicom actually buying some of the Telefonica's assets. So we'll see a different scenario next year.
Okay. All right. Bruno, we appreciate you bringing us up to speed on mobile in Latin America there. We're going to switch over to Lynette. And like the Who song, we're also going mobile, this time in the States. Lynette, can you give us a sense for total postpaid phone market in the U.S.?
Yes, and we focus on postpaid phones because they are the highest revenue generators. So that's a metric that financial analysts really focus on. So at the end of 2024, we estimated that it reached more than 258 million. So that represents about a 76% of the U.S. population. And we expect it to grow pretty slowly because it's so saturated, less than 1% from 2025 to 2035. To account for about 79% of the population.
I think John had mentioned this at the top. There are more phones than people. Lynette, can you give us any sense for in the States here, people have how many lines?
That's the real focus for carriers, is to continually add new services onto postpaid plan. And so there's very heavy multi-line discounts for families. Individuals actually carry more than one phone for business and for personal reasons. There's people migrating from prepaid to postpaid. That's a pretty aggressive move there for carriers like T-Mobile, which allow customers to move from prepaid to postpaid if they've paid their bill on time for a certain amount of time without a credit check. There's so many promotions with free iPhones, and the prepaid customers are counted as new postpaid ads, even though they're not new customers. And we also have MVNOs moving migration to postpaid phones as well.
The prepaid market been in an up and down mode for the last few years. In which direction is it headed now?
It's pretty flat. Carriers really use it as an entry point for new customers or those who are not willing to pay for postpaid services to eventually migrate them and offer them new phones just to get more profitable customers on the postpaid side. So we expect that to grow at just 0.5% CAGR.
Oh, really? Okay.
Decade.
Okay.
Like Bruno had said earlier, they come with significantly lower ARPU than postpaid phone subscribers. So you see an ebb and flow with prepaid if you're trying to say like the Christmas selling season, be aggressive and gain as many subscribers as possible. Those certain quarters of the year, you'll see some really good growth. And then others, there's a heavier focus on postpaid.
One thing I wanted to talk about, I found interesting, I'm talking about wearables and tablets and IoT lines. More lines going to help the business, right?
Yeah, the more you add to a postpaid plan, the more revenue you generate. Like I said, there's only so many phones you can sell. I just saw today that Verizon's the exclusive provider of the Meta Ray-Ban display glasses. So they're making a big deal out of that. But yes, we're going to see a lot of wearables, and tablets have been around for a while, but we could see more aggressive movements on special deals on those. We have the direct device satellite lines. Right now, they're included with a lot of plans, but I think as their capabilities grow, they could definitely be a separate charge there, especially depending on what technology a certain carrier uses. T-Mobile uses Starlink, and then other carriers are going to use different providers. So they're probably going to have different capabilities.
Right.
So we expect about a CAGR of 8% from 2025 to 2035 for the segment, growing to about 168 million by 2035. It'll be lower revenue per user, but if they can get aggressive on that, that should be a nice revenue boost for them.
So device iteration's a good thing for carriers.
Yes. We're also talking about services that go with these connected devices. Upsells such as insurance and managed services, cross-selling premium connectivity, lower churn. So it's not just measured in revenue per device, but there's also services that you can blend in that.
All right. Bruno, we talked a little bit about 4G and 5G. What's the 5G story here in the U.S., Lynette?
Pretty much everything is 5G these days.
Okay.
4G is kind of a backup for roaming,
Okay.
but it's pretty ubiquitous now.
How about wholesale subscriptions? We're talking about the cable companies here. What's your forecast in that arena?
That should be good growth, almost 3% CAGR during the next decade. And it's all because of cable MVNOs. We have Comcast, Charter, Cox, and they're really aggressively increasing their subscriber lines and offering promotions and free phones. But then we also see new MVNOs coming up that were aggressive, but then carriers like to buy those companies just because they reach out to different segments of users that a carrier would not. So I muted the growth a little bit just because of that.
Lynette, can you just give us an overall sense for the mobile market in the U.S.?
Yeah, it's a mature market. We have 3 operators now. US Cellular was purchased by T-Mobile, and I think that's all that they can handle. We saw EchoStar get out of the mobile business and just be an MVNO. Intense competition among the 3. They're just moving customers back and forth. So we'll see ARPU kind of moderate and slower service revenue growth. It's just a mature market. It's becoming a utility going forward.
And in terms of total mobile subscriptions, for those who like the scorecard?
Yeah. So they should grow from about 454 million in 2025 that we estimate to about 580 million by 2035. So that's a 2.5% CAGR.
I got you. That's good stuff, right?
Yeah. Interesting to see where the next wave of growth is going to come from.
We've talked 4, 5, and now 6G. When does that become a thing?
It usually is a 10-year cycle. So about by 2030. And I think instead of revolutionizing wireless networks like we saw with 5G, 6G will present more of an evolution using existing frequencies and much higher frequencies. So it'll deliver a lot greater capacity and lower latency. And of course, we'll have a lot of AI elements to it, but it'll be similar to previous air interface technologies. You always want faster data speeds with lower latency.
We're going to switch over to broadband now. John, can you give us a real top line view here?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm surprised, Lynette, you didn't mention connected pets. I think that's going to be a big growth driver, especially with 6G. I want to see what my cats are doing at night. They've been bringing back some weird animals in the morning.
I remember Japan counting pets is like the next generation of growth, but that was a decade ago, so maybe it'll be real now.
It'll be brought to you by Petco and Purina.
Not a bad idea. You heard it here first. So switching gears to fixed broadband. Yeah, we mentioned the 4 technology flavors. You got cable, fiber, satellite, and fixed wireless. Again, the U.S. kind of dominates across these 8 countries with about half of the 230 million subscriptions in the U.S. When we look at the penetration across all 8 of those countries, the interesting thing to me was you have the mature markets, like Lynette was saying, the U.S., and then Canada too. They're getting close to 100% penetration with broadband across homes. And on the other side of that extremity, you have Peru and Colombia, which are both below 50% penetration. And then the rest of the group is somewhere in the middle in terms of home broadband access. And I think I covered the U.S., and there's 2 interesting things I want to bring up about the U.S. It's an odd market for 2 reasons. We're couch potatoes here. We rolled out cable TV in the 70s and the 80s. And then in the late 90s, someone at a cable operator figured out we could use that same coax for broadband, and voila, there's a new revenue stream, a much higher margin revenue stream.
Right.
And that early mover advantage is still having an impact in the market 25 years later. 60% of broadband subscriptions in the US are still using cable. And fiber is around 20% in the US, which is unbelievably low. Most countries is fiber dominated. Fiber is much higher across the world versus the US because of that cable early entrance. The second weird thing is fixed wireless. And this is what Tomás teases me about a lot because, this in the US, it grew from a couple million subscriptions forever. And then T-Mobile and Verizon unlocked some spectrum around COVID time. A lot of naysayers at the time, and there still are some now, Tomás. The reality is 13% of broadband subscriptions in the US are on fixed wireless, just like me. But it's a US only story for now. There are other markets that have fixed wireless for sure, but it's a real small share. A lot of them don't have excess spectrum to try something like fixed wireless. It's relegated to connecting rural areas and used as a duplicate broadband backup. Another interesting thing with fixed wireless is businesses love it. If you look at fiber and cable, they'd be lucky to get 10% of their base with commercial or B2B customers. For fixed wireless, that number is almost 25%. So businesses are eating it up. And the good thing about businesses is they pay a lot more. Their ARPUs are usually twice as much as a consumer ARPU. How it shakes out, just to throw some numbers out there, the US at the end of the year, we think it's going to have somewhere around 14 million fixed wireless. Canada has 1 million. Brazil at 1 million, and then everyone else in Latin America is 500,000 or lower, just about. So it's still an anomaly specific to the US for now, but I'm keeping my eye out.
Tomás, John referenced the early mover advantage for cable here in terms of broadband. Cable outside of the US and Canada, where does that stand in terms of being the vehicle of choice?
As part of the development, one of the things that we have seen in Latin America is that cable took the lead just before the pandemic hit as the main technology for residential broadband specific in Latin America, but it was overtaken by fiber. It has a lot to do with internet providers in Latin America reaching out to new markets that had very little coverage besides old-style copper DSL technology, which was inherited from analog telephone services in the last century. And those are being directly replaced with fiber. So it has been almost a direct jump from DSL to fiber with a very short interlude of cable dominating the sector.
Fiber is the player here then, right?
Absolutely. It's already a technology of choice in the region in most countries. It already has around 62% of the whole Latin American market.
Okay. Compared to the US is like 60% cable, right, John?
Exactly.
So 180s from the US side down to Latin America. I apologize, guys.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we're expecting that to grow even more. We're expecting fiber to get to over 70% across Latin America, not just the 8 countries that we most recently checked by 2031. As John said, countries like the US and Canada have a very wide distribution of cable since the last century, and replacing that technology, which already serves a purpose, it's a lot. I imagine it's a harder proposition for them. One of the things, just to mention what John was mentioning regarding fixed wireless access, there was already around 10% of the US market being fixed wireless access in 2024, and they're expecting it to get to around 16 in 7 years. By comparison, Mexico, which was the largest market in terms of subscribers in wireless access in the region, it had around 5% of the market in 2020, and that has been coming down to around 3% in 2024. We are expecting it to keep dropping in the future, not just in Mexico, but across Latin America.
Okay. Can you talk a little bit about things that are happening in Brazil and Peru specifically?
Yeah, those are really interesting cases in their own way, but they're very different. In the case of Brazil, deployment of fiber has been helped basically by the emergence of a very large number of small and mid-sized internet service providers over the years. Some of them are national, some of them attend regional markets. Most of those companies have focused heavily on fiber because they're reaching smaller localities beyond Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro and Brasilia. They're reaching smaller cities and increasing coverage there. So that's what has pushed ahead Brazilian broadband connections. Brazil is a bit ahead in terms of residential broadband penetration. It was around 63.7% in 2025, while Latin America as a whole was at 56.7%.
Okay.
In the case of Peru, this is a country that has a really complicated geography between the coastal zone, where big cities like Lima, which has about a quarter of the population of the country, are the Andes and then the Amazon basin. Since the pandemic forced people in urban centers to work from home and adopt residential broadband, it has grown at over 10% yearly from 2020 to 2024, much faster than other markets. Brazil, which was the second fastest growing broadband market in the region, grew at nearly 8% during that same period. And our observations put that growth for Peru at around 8% in the next 7 years.
As you mentioned, all of those different geographies, I guess people really have to be innovative to get to the customers down there.
Absolutely. In one of our latest collaborations with the regional team, we focused on those large 6 markets, comparing with the US and Canada.
Yep.
No, but one of the things that we're seeing is that growth for Latin America is likely to decelerate in the coming years because most of these countries are reaching levels of near saturation, and saturation in Latin America is not the same as saturation in developed, richer countries like Canada and the United States, because in Latin America, we have at around 20% of the population living in poverty. So at some point, you have to choose. You need a cell phone, and this is why Bruno and Lynette are talking about levels of penetration that go over 100% easily
Right. Okay.
in the region. And you need your mobile for work, for constant communication that we are used to right now. But that doesn't mean you can afford to have a cell phone and to have a home internet connection. So these levels of poverty have an influence in our broadband projections for the region, which is around 57% for 2025 right now. This is our residential broadband penetration estimation for the end of this year. And we're looking at about 62% for 2031, because in some households, you have to make a choice between your cell phone connection and your broadband connection at home.
John, as you look out to 2031, Kagan estimates that broadband penetration will be virtually complete in Canada, like 99%, I believe. US at 98, Argentina 82, Chile 78, Mexico 72, Brazil 70, Peru 60, and Colombia 46. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because you mentioned the terrain differences. If you're in the Andes, it makes fixed wireless a little more difficult in some cases. And so painting a region with one single paintbrush is really difficult because not only you have mountains and trees that are different between countries, but you have demographic differences like Tomás was just bringing up. And I would add, you have different regulators of every single country, and they all have a different approach to how to fix this problem. And they can snap their fingers and do something, or force the market to do something that makes them a unique outlier compared to their neighbors. So I think ultimately we do see broadband growth across the region. It's just going to depend on which country you're looking at. And yes, the US is at 90% currently. That last 10% is not going to be easy or cheap. I think we can get there with fixed wireless and satellite. I sure hope so, because my projections assume so. And broadband's a utility just like mobile. And at the top of the call, we talked about how mobile penetration is already over 100%. And just because a market like the US hits 100% penetration with broadband doesn't mean there's an automatic hard stop there. There might be room for duplicate broadband connections for a home business, for example, that keeps that number growing even beyond that cap of 100%. So yeah, we do see growth, and it's just going to be so specific to each area, which is why it's so important to have regional experts to guide you through each market individually.
Right. Tomás, what about in the other nations? Again, since the penetration levels are much lower, opportunities lie ahead.
Absolutely. You can see that in Peru, broadband revenue grew by about 20% yearly between 2020 and 2024. And we expect that to be slower as you reach your market size, but still growing at around 6% in the next 7 years, which regarding the comparison of these 8 countries that we mentioned, we expect broadband revenue to grow at around 4.2% between 2025 and 2031 over the next 7 years. But other countries are seeing slower growth than that. For example, in Colombia, which is one of the markets that has us more puzzled because fixed broadband penetration there seems to be growing at a much slower pace than the rest of the region. We're even projecting revenues to decrease a bit over the next few years. But yes, definitely, there's still room to grow. But again, we mentioned income disparities. We mentioned the United States is a country with a gross national income per capita of around $85,000 a year, while Latin America is around 22. I don't think you can ever reach the levels of ARPU that you can reach in the States of Canada in the foreseeable future, because it will make it unaffordable for most of the population.
We're getting to the end here. I just wanted to give you guys a chance to sign off by saying, for the balance of 2025 and into 2026, what are you guys going to be looking most closely as? Bruno, can we start with you?
Yeah, I'm looking at some of the 5G and millimeter wave deployments, spectrum auctions, and M&As. Also curious about new regulators in Argentina and Mexico and how this will affect these markets.
Tomás, what's top of mind for you?
One of the things that I'm going to be looking at over the next year or so is the redistribution of power and dominance between different operators. Currently in Latin America, the same as in mobile, in broadband, América Móvil is the largest operator across the region, but there are new operators, or maybe not new operators, but operators that have been a bit more focused on certain regions, like, for example, Millicom, that are now coming into larger markets like Peru, that are something to see if they can shake up the competition, especially since Telefónica, with the exception of the Brazilian market, which is their second largest market, Telefónica is singing its swan song in the rest of Latin America, leaving, and we're looking at what's going to happen now with new operators coming in.
All right, Lynette, your turn.
For the rest of 2025, the big Christmas selling season is a big deal. And just looking at a lot of the deals and how they make that final push in the fourth quarter. Going forward, there's issues with spectrum. Carriers need more spectrum. There's not a lot to be found. There has to be some sort of deal with the Department of Defense. And right now they're far apart for some of those frequencies that are appealing to commercial carriers. And just the evolution of these companies as they become mature companies. We saw 2 new CEOs are coming in, one in T-Mobile and one at Verizon. Dan Schulman at Verizon is more consumer platform focused, and that's what Verizon has really needed to compete in the consumer market.
All right. Last words to you, John.
I think the next 2 years for broadband, I see continued buzz and growth for both fixed wireless and LEO satellite. We didn't get too much into satellite in this conversation. Starlink has also been a disruptor the last few years and brought the satellite space back to growth. Amazon's Kuiper, they've launched some satellites. They might come in. LEO satellite, that's low Earth orbit, is very inexpensive relative to the traditional satellite options out there. So with fixed wireless adding 1 million new customers every quarter for the last 2 years, we're going to see how long that can go for. I think that it does have a few more years, maybe 2 more years to keep going. At the same time, I do see some broadband price wars in the US. We're already seeing 5 and 10 year price locks from some operators.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was just wild. And bundling, where the buzzword now is convergence for mobile and fixed. But in terms of the customer, to have your fixed broadband operator and your mobile service from the same company. And I think entering stage left kind of randomly, I think video is going to enter more into these bundling options too. A lot of these operators are bundling these streaming apps. Go figure, right? It all goes full circle now. And I think given our favorable regulatory landscape, I am expecting to see some more M&A in the US.
Some interesting parting thoughts from everybody. That concludes this episode of Media Talk. I want to thank our guests, Bruno, Lynette, Tomás, and John. for sharing their time and their expertise. This is Mike Reynolds. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch up soon on the next installment of Media Talk.